Hi, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year! 明けましておめでとうございます。
明けましておめでとうございます。How was your break?
Has school started yet? It's still like
Literally counting
when?
down the minutes. Literally. So,
So maybe you parent listeners can relate to that. But I am very excited for the start of 2026, despite the news headlines that continue to pull out the trajectory of 2025 and perhaps make it a little bit worse.
pop quiz. What country are we going to invade next? Ooh. Anyone willing to place some wagers? Like,
Well, and look, I get it. I am excited for action, just not that kind of action. I'm excited for the kind of action we're going to be doing here on the
you
podcast
mean
in
like legal
2026.
action
Yeah.
or like
No,
stuff that's like sanctioned by people or
not
follows
violent.
logic or
Yes.
rational? Yeah, okay, cool. Cool. Me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yep. So,
Okay. Well, with all of that in mind, if you are a repeat listener to the podcast over the last almost 7 years, you know that sometimes at the start of a new year or start of a new season, we've done these arcs in which we focus on a topic or theme for the season, or I guess really for the season. And also, just a quick shout out to those of you who may have just found us in 2026. Hello. You're in the right
hello.
place for a whole lot of real talk. But this year, we're doing something different. We're doing, instead of a seasonal focus, we're doing a year long focus on action, which, if you have followed us or aware of our work, that is really the third pillar of our listen, learn, and act framework, which moves us from the sort of amorphous, like, what can I do, to here's how I show up.
And I love that you mentioned the framework. It is something that you can see really clearly in our book, Dear White Women, Let's Get Uncomfortable Talking About Racism. It's very clear: listen, learn, and act. I'm excited because we're going to take the things that you've been curious about, I've been curious about, like that we have all been curious about, but maybe you didn't want to ask about, and break down the history behind them and really walk you through why these things matter. And we're going to throw in tips about how, now that you know about them, you can change some of the small things in your own lives that can make a huge impact in your community and in the fight for all of us. We're in it to win it this year, folks, and we hope you'll come along for the journey. So, with that, welcome to 2026 and a whole new year of What Do You Mean by That? A podcast about asking better questions, having deeper conversations, and taking action that helps all of us.
All right, so I feel like it is only fitting for us to kick off this year of actions with something that is deeply personal to us.
Here's a hint. Hi, my name is Sarah.
Hi, my name is Misasha. And I think this is something that we talk about a lot, but we probably can't talk about it enough because names, as you might have guessed, are often the very first thing we learn about someone. And sometimes the first place we end up hurting someone as well, intentionally or more often than not, unintentionally. So today we're going to ask each other 5 questions about names and really stick to these topics of why they matter, what happens when they're misused, and how something as small as pronunciation can be deeply tied to identity, respect, and well-being. So, Sarah, I'm going to kick it off and ask you something. What does a name actually carry or hold beyond just identifying someone?
I love this, and I can't wait. I'm going to ask you the same question because I know I'm waiting for the stories that are going to come out. But, when I think of a name, like I think of that cocktail party phenomenon. You're chatting with someone, and all of a sudden you hear your name, like, hey, Sarah, and you hear it like somewhere in the room, and you sort of perk up. Like somehow your brain picks up on your name being said, even if you were engaged in a conversation elsewhere. And what I think that says is just how core your name is to your sense of self and attention. And to nerd out for a second, because we are nerds here. I know there's a lot like studies, and it shows that like hearing your name activates certain brain regions that are responsible for your thought patterns and your behaviors that relate to your identity and your personality, which is basically kind of a fancy way to say you just feel more engaged, right? Hearing your name improves your perception, your attention, and your memory. And so if I'm talking to you, Misasha, and I say your name, Misasha, during the course of a conversation, Misasha, Hopefully not like that because that's annoying.
It's a
But
little creepy.
it really like captures your attention and brings you back into the moment, just like it does at a cocktail party where you go, whoa, someone's talking about me. Let me hear what they're doing or saying. So that's one. But the second thing, which, well, I want to hear your story first and then I can tell my story because I feel like you've got one about your kids and the names.
I mean, what kind of time do we have?
Or maybe we talk about that later in our series of questions.
Yeah, I don't, it's so hard because I think when you were talking about that anecdote of hearing your name at a cocktail party, like A, that rarely happens. B, you must have fantastic hearing because I can't hear anything at cocktail parties.
Do I go to cocktail parties?
Yeah, great example. Except this has literally never happened to me.
Maybe it's just the fact that my name is so common for my age. And so people just talk about other people with my name.
All right, fair. Because also I know that if someone's saying my name, they're probably talking about me because I have yet to meet another Misasha. And this is what happens when your parents make up your name. There's a lot of other things that happen when your parents make up your name. And Sarah, you've witnessed some of
we should talk about them. Yes.
All of them. I mean, you've not witnessed all of them. And I think that's why you're always like, how are you not more offended by certain things? And I'm like, literally happening all my life. I don't know, it is like, and having kids, right? The names you name your kids carry so much of what you want for them and how you see them, right, in those names. And I think that was the same for my parents with me, where they were like, this is going to be a great way to have this, like multi-ethnic kid, like be accepted by everyone. And then spoiler alert, accepted by zero, because that's actually not what happens a lot of times when you make up names. But you know what? I also did the same thing to my kids because I was like, this is really a large part of who they are. And this should be reflected in their names. And it is highly confusing to everyone because they have fairly unique, non-made up though, Japanese names. And it is hard for people to see the Japanese in them. And I think but
why?
That is
let's explain if we have new listeners why.
Right. So they are Black, Japanese, and white. Now they're getting up into teenage years, terrifying. And they're seen as Black boys, Black teens now. And so I think that, that is even more important now for them to have these names because this carries so much of who our family is and what I want for them and the history that they carry with them, right? By representing the family. We always say we tell the boys, right? You represent the family like our last name when you're out there, but they actually represent through their first names as well. And I think that's something that you can't discount, right? When you come across someone and you hear their name, and that is the hopes that their parents had for them as well.
Yeah. And I think what you said without saying it was that sense of belonging, like they're representing you because they belong to you. They belong in this community. And I think that's what a name carries beyond identification. It really signifies belonging for the people who named you, belonging, maybe you were named for family history, for culture. I had an instance, I'm also Japanese and white, and I wanted to work in Japan. And I think it can go also like you're belonging to a country. My Japanese name on my Japanese passport was Yoko Hasegawa. Literally, no people know me as Yoko Hasegawa. So when I went to work in Japan, my email at Goldman Sachs was, for my summer internship, yoko.hasegawa@gs.com. And like, who was going to contact me there? Like, I go by Sarah, like that's just how I was raised. And so when I wanted to get that email changed, they wouldn't change it unless I re-entered Japan using my American passport, which said Sarah Blanchard. And that is actually why I wound up losing my Japanese passport, because at the office they said, look, well, you are of that age where you have to declare, you can sign a piece of paper saying you want to give up your US citizenship in order to be able to and like keep this name and do blah, 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 blah. Anyway, it was a long legal thing. But long story short, I had to decide who I belonged as, what name like I most resonated with, and what country I wanted to belong to more. And that was the power of me having to choose which name I entered a country in and how I wanted to show up for work. And so again, the belonging is really significant. And so unless you have something else to add, I want to ask you the next question. Why does, and this is specifically for you, because people don't have problems with my name, why does mispronouncing or misspelling, maybe misspelling is for me, but someone's name, even unintentionally, have an impact. And I like want to laugh because of the instances of mispronunciation I have sat through with you where what have people said about your name?
I mean, I always appreciate the people who try, right? Like even if you're going to say it wrong, people add letters, drop letters. Like it's phonetic, right? Misasha. It is exactly how it's spelled. And yet people like really, really work hard to like find the most difficult way to say this, right? So I always appreciate when people try, because I also think on the flip side, like I tell this story sometimes. I used to work for a partner who would send me these emails and spell check would automatically switch my name to Miasma and he would never correct it. Like
That's
never.
what my cell phone does to you sometimes.
Seriously. But I was like, seriously, we have worked together for years and this small thing, it showed kind of like a lack of caring to me, right? Because like I always double and triple check names because of the experiences I've had with my own names. But I think people, we get emails regularly at the podcast where, people are trying to pitch us. And I've been called Melissa. I've been called Natasha. And I was like, look, our name is all over everything, right? It literally takes 2 seconds to just be like, oh, it's Sarah and Misasha. So I think, to me, it shows like if you're not interested in it enough, right, to start with my name, then you probably don't really care about me as a person. That's kind of, for better, for worse, that's kind of the response I have. And I see it with my kids too. And, and I also see it when people are like, oh, can I shorten your name? Because I'm like, seriously, it's phonetic. I only shorten my name at coffee shops because I can't sometimes. I can't. And even then, people are like, how do you spell? So Sasha is my coffee shop name. And people are like, well, how do you spell that? And I'm like, seriously, people? Like, sometimes I default to Sarah, I'm going to be honest.
Can I ask a question about that? Because I say Sarah and they're like, how do you spell that? With an H or not? So
okay, so this goes back to my point of people just trying to make it as difficult as possible.
Or I'm going to offer a flip side argument. They want to get it right. I always say, oh, thanks for asking, because like they might want to get it right for you. And so, because I have a very common name, you may be so used to being annoyed at how people mistake your name that it's seen as like a, are you kidding me situation. But I feel like they're trying really hard to get it right because there's 2 spellings of my name and they want to make sure they do it right for the customer.
I could see that. I will also say that after I got married, and I had Suzuki as my main name, and it's still my middle name for the longest time, right? And Misasha Suzuki is just like a recipe for people to just butcher your name all day long, right? Like left and right. So I was like, okay, look, like now Graham is my last name. Like people, this is going to be so freaking easy. And I would sit there and people would be like, Mrs. Graham. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like how? And this is not an isolated incident. I will say this is repeated. It happens multiple times a year. And so that is how I also became convinced that sometimes it is just people, I appreciate when people try. I really do.
Yeah. And I think the other thing it reveals to me with the spelling stuff is a lack of attention to detail. I get viscerally. So the reason I even have my maiden name as my work name, is because people could not spell my rather plain married last name. Like I already had people consistently, and they will reply to my emails where clearly my name is Sara. It's in my footer. It's in my email address. Yeah. Like it's very clear what my spelling is. And they will write back, hi, Sarah, with an H. And then you add on this other really generic last name and people make up a whole, like they add endings to it. They drop letters. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a problem. Like 0 people will find me on a Google search if they can't even get my first name right, let alone second name. And I felt like it was, with a more unique name like yours, people aren't paying attention, but then people make assumptions and are very lazy when it comes to generic names too. And again, to me, it's like, dude, if you can't even pay attention to the details of a name, how are you going to pay attention to the details of a project? Like, how can I trust you to do the work to get it right? And so I think to me, that's some of the further impact. Like I wind up judging people unless they write back and they're like, oh my gosh, sorry, or autocorrect, or like they catch it, because mistakes happen. I don't care about that. But when it's consistent, and especially for a stranger and you're trying to get business or have an interaction with someone, it really shows a lack of respect and a lack of attention to detail. So
yeah. So, like, let me ask you then, because besides like those instances where we talked about in coffee shops where people are like, oh, how do you spell that? Or, something,
Mhm.
it seems like people are really hesitant to ask, though. At least I've experienced that. Like, so why do you think people are so hesitant to ask for help with names?
I mean, I would say a lot of people are hesitant right now in society to ask for help for anything. Like there's this image of like, people are hesitant to ask for help for almost anything because there's this false narrative of like independence and I can figure it out myself and I have to project that I've already got it all figured out. It's like a sort of perfectionism and needing to seem like you have it all figured out. And there's some like level of anxiety that probably comes with that too, right? But I also feel like there's this fear of vulnerability and fear of being awkward. Like, how do you like pronounce your name feels like, but I guess the question that I would have to push back to that is, would you rather be rude for getting it wrong or feel rude for asking? Either way, it's going to be awkward. So why not, given everything we've discussed so far, ask? The one thing I will say though, that's difficult is that it takes effort to listen to the response. So if people, I mean, you and I have been on interviews where people actually do the right thing and they ask how to pronounce your name, they stumble on it, they ask for clarification, and they can't get it right. Like it does take effort. It takes it takes brain power to listen
Yeah.
and then to learn it and practice it, especially if it's not something that you're used to saying, right? But I feel like you kind of have to try. Like you're either really lazy and you don't want to try, or maybe like it's going to signal that you then don't have the capacity to learn something new. So I feel like when you ask someone a question like, how do you pronounce your name? You better be zoomed in right there on the response and capture it and like do your very best to repeat it back. Like practice this idea of pronouncing new words because otherwise it really showcases your inability to or your lack of trying if you don't get it right after that.
Yeah, and I am someone who ironically has a tough time with names, right? Like remembering names. And I think back to my fitness instructor days where it was like super important because if you're telling someone to get an inch lower or do like 10 more push-ups, like you want to use their name and you want to say it correctly because they probably already hate you in the moment. And so like what I would do, and I remember someone telling me this, is like really to say it at least 3 times to your point about repeating it, right? And so it feels a little awkward to kind of say someone's name, right? Repeatedly, not right in a row, because that just is like horror movie creepy.
What's
But
that, Misasha? Can you say that
don't
again,
do it.
Misasha?
No, okay. Yeah, or like you're hyper focused in a skiing like too many
Hmm.
Dateline episodes type of way. But that really helps you cement that, right? Because you definitely have to be hyper focused though in that moment where you ask them their name or how to pronounce their name or ask for clarification on their name because I definitely used to have my brain shut off in those moments and be like, oh my gosh, like now I'm an idiot because I can't re-ask because I just asked them. So yeah, but it does require an attention and a like attention level that we are not used to, I think, as a society.
Well, and the other point that I will add based on our experience, when you're thinking of, oh, whether you're repeating the name in your head or you're remembering here's a rhyme in my life that's relevant, don't be like the news dude who we interviewed, who asked how to pronounce your
I
name
was waiting for you to tell
and
this
said,
story. I was like,
me,
definitely going
Sasha,
to tell it.
oh, that reminds me of my dog's name. And you're like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I mean, it was like a weird, and it was beyond that, right? I mean, maybe I'm
Yeah,
remembering it incorrectly, but it was like, it was a really weird
it was weird.
affirmation and the way that this person did it. So don't be like that. Don't like necessarily feel you need to share your mnemonic tricks to like to the person. Just do it. I want to ask a question though, because you mentioned you have a coffee shop name. And I know in particular, like even with your boy, like with everybody, people sometimes feel pressured to shorten or change, I certainly know in a lot of Asian names, like you have to quote Americanize your names. They like come up with a completely bogus like Western name because they're faced with a lifetime of people not being able to pronounce their actual given names. What happens then?
Yeah, I mean, I think I benefited from having a mom who was like, there will absolutely be no nicknames. Like, whenever people were, and I was like, I mean, my mom, so this is not a surprise to you. But like, when people would ask when I was younger, she would be like, hard no, it is Misasha, or, and that's it. Because people would try and shorten it. Because I think you want to get to something familiar, right? You want to get to something you know. And because it's easier to remember, it's easier to say, I think, to all the points that we were talking about earlier, right? It takes away some of that awkwardness for the person who's saying the name, right? Not necessarily for the person whose name it is. And so I have fought that. I have like channeled my best mom, my mom, in those moments where it comes to my own boys, because I too, we have a couple family nicknames for them, but like outside of our house, they have one name and it's their name. And that is because of who they are. And I think it's because of the family that they were born into, that they were destined to just be stuck with zero nicknames for the rest of their life until they're old enough to kind of decide for themselves if they want to have a nickname or whatever.
Sure.
But that's a different thing if you decide, right? Versus society sort of putting a nickname on you. But why do you think people, and how do you think people deal with this?
I've never had a nickname to this day. I'm terrible. Like, when you have like wine glass markers and people are like, do a funny nickname for yourself. And I'm like, I got nothing.
What do you
Sarah.
write? Okay.
I probably write Sarah. Like, I've never had a nickname in my life. Like, I wish I was so cool that I could have a nickname. But I think there is some pressure to come up with like a more Americanized name in some ways, or Western name, because not only does it make other people comfortable, there is bias, right? Yeah. Like, I'm sure all of our listeners by now know this, but like there's so much research. There's research from UC Berkeley and the University of Chicago showing that applicants with names suggesting that they were white got 50% more callbacks from employers than those whose names indicated that they were Black. Same thing goes for Asian names. Ryerson University and the University of Toronto, which are both in Canada, found that job applicants in Canada with Asian names, whether they're Indian, Pakistani, or Chinese, were 28% less likely to get called for an interview compared to applicants that had Anglican sort of sounding names, even when all the qualifications are the same. So we do have bias. We have to accept the reality that people are biased in society, and you will then face the consequences of that if your name it sounds different than like a Western name. But I think there's been a movement, based on what I hear, certainly from more Asian friends, to reclaim their actual given names and be comfortable not calling themselves whatever sort of Americanized name that they sort of went by as a nickname, because I think they want to reclaim the identity, their actual heritage, their pride in where they come from, their history, their culture. So I don't know. I'm curious for you then, like, especially because people mess up your name way more than they mess up my name. How can getting names right be like a really simple but powerful practice to help people in your community feel like they belong more?
Yeah. I think like it shows a level of caring, right? It shows a level of interest in someone. Not even if you get the name right the first time, but if you ask about how do you pronounce it, or, you take the time to spell it right. I think we've been talking about how names reflect our identities. It can be a cultural identity, it can be like a familial identity. But the more that you get people's names right, the more you reinforce, especially for people whose names are very unique, or, you've heard the stories of their names, right? That is a powerful sense of identity and belonging to all of the things that their name represents for them. What do you think?
I think you got it. I mean, I think it doesn't take much, right? It takes just that extra moment of time to remember when you're meeting someone, when you're being introduced to someone, to just flick your brain on for that extra moment to get it right, whether it's spelling or pronunciation. Pay attention to that detail because it signals you care. And I feel like it really establishes this groundwork for building a stronger relationship. And good Lord, do we need better relationships in community right now, right? So like, can we please start with this simple building block this year of paying attention to people's names and honoring them, because it shows that you're honoring the person and that like the value that they have just by existing.
Yeah. And I would think since, especially thinking about the start of this year, right? And on a global level or on a national level, like a push towards like a homogenous culture and a push towards an in-group and an out-group, in which the in-group is kind of the people that have always been in the in-group. So it's been great for them. And the out-group is everyone else. But we are so much more than that simple, like very linear, very uncomplicated narrative. And so I think the more that we get people's names right, the more that we take the time to learn about names, that is a challenge to that, that presumption that America was made for just a couple people when it is so much more than that.
I agree.
So on that end, I think names are where respect becomes audible, right? And I also keep going back to that concept of names are our parents' hopes and dreams for us. And, as we've been discussing sort of this whole time, like the smallest acts of care are the ones that change how safe it feels to show up as ourselves.
Yeah. And it can sound as simple as, I want to say your name correctly. Could you please teach me? Or how do you pronounce your name? Or is it Misasha or miasma? Just kidding.
I will know now when autocorrect comes on. But anyway, so if there is one takeaway from this episode, it's this: say people's names and say them correctly, spell them correctly. And if you don't know how to do that, ask. Because it's those small acts, even the ones that may seem awkward, that often have the biggest impact.
You've been listening to What Do You Mean by That? A show dedicated to being better humans and getting loud for all of us. Hat tip to Sarah's daughter for the logo, and huge thanks to Misasha's son for our incredible theme music. Find out more and subscribe to our newsletter at whatdoyoumeanbythat.com. Because as always, it's all of us or it's none of us.